Alright, hello everyone. Today I will be talking about context building for world debates. This video will be very example heavy to elucidate the technique that I want to teach. The "this house prefers a world" motion is different from other motions in the sense that you are comparing the existing world that we have against another hypothetical world where some change is made. Now, this change can be relatively small or relatively large, and the extent of its effects on the course of history or the course of human development and relations will always substantially be subject to debate. So the primary lesson here always is start from what is relatively guaranteed and then proceed to use this as an anchoring point to argue larger changes that may happen in the formation of this particular world. Before anything else, I just want to say that "this house prefers a world" motion still implies that we use a neutral observer to evaluate the implications of these two different worlds. So it's also important to use this context building portion as an opportunity to construct how value systems are also created as well, and then proceed to evaluate whether this is a good thing in general or not. It's just as simple as that for these types of motions. First, let's say the motion was "this house prefers a world where children are raised communally." Instead of immediately going in to arguing why communal raising is a good thing in general, you may want to concretize what this looks like. Of course, neither side is likely changing the way children are biologically born, so there are still direct parents in this world. Furthermore, children will likely still grow up to become adults on either side, and schools will still likely exist. So in a world where children were raised communally, then it is very likely that this would include the following. First, communities will be more tightly knit, where everyone knows their neighbors and treats them not as distant acquaintances, but as close personal relatives. Two, these parent communities would likely share in the burden of raising a child, which includes dedicating time to babysitting, sharing financial resources accordingly, and even setting up institutions to make this job more efficient, like a common play area or a common dormitory. And third, some parents might specialize or even focus in their roles of parenting, such as in the skills that they are good at, without having to rely on individual parents to do it themselves if it wasn't communal. So with this example, if you noticed, these ideas already provide a lot of room for you to argue why these things are good. And they are created because of the likely incentives that align among different parents. Most parents want their children to do well in school, and most parents want to make raising a child easier on themselves. So it's a no-brainer that these communities will be organized in this particular way too. That's the first lesson on incentives and likely institutional alignments. Second, let's say the motion was "this house prefers a world with one global superpower rather than multiple international superpowers." Here, the lesson I want to teach is more historical. Specifically, the question you should immediately ask yourself when looking at this motion is, how would the formation of states look like in this world? How would global trade arise in this context? Without veering too much on speculation, we can say the following. First, a world with one global superpower is one where this superpower likely was able to successfully demonstrate itself as the most dominant militarily and economically against other nations. Two, it is highly likely that even if there may have been some conflicts to maintain this global superpower position throughout history, this global superpower has gained the favor of most nations and most countries to abide by their directives and initiatives because it is in their interest to do so. And lastly, it is highly likely that throughout human history, this global superpower dictated the formation of modern nation states through influencing their economic development, and has also exported their influence through military bases or through providing access to international trade to its own institutions and terms. So if you notice, this argument didn't start by talking about what this world would hypothetically look like, but rather we start by asking, how would a global superpower arise? In fact, this is a very important point of contention for this motion. While government might portray this process as being eventually peaceful and stable, it's very easy for opposition to also demonstrate that this global superpower can be very authoritarian and violent in the way that it scrambled for power throughout human history. And here, there's a lot of room to play around with this characterization, and it makes the debate so much more richer, rather than just speculating it as a debate of having one large country on one side and then multiple medium-sized battling countries on the other. So again, the lesson here is to be historical whenever you can construct characterizations that are beneficial or helpful for your argument. Lastly, let's say the motion was this house prefers a world where religious beliefs and teachings are not codified into scripture or doctrine. Here we are looking at a specific change for a specific institution that was very influential throughout human history. So my recommendation in this particular motion is not to be too broad, but rather to be more focused on how religious institutions would behave throughout religious history, and then proceed to make arguments around that. Because while you're making these arguments, you are implicitly building the world as well. So the question is, how would the incentives of religious leaders and institutions change if their beliefs and teachings were not codified into scripture or doctrine? You could say the following. First, no matter what the reason was for the founding fathers and first scholars not to codify these teachings into scripture, succeeding scholars would never dare to codify anything into scripture as well due to the risk of inaccuracy and to follow this tradition of the flexibility of religious instruction. Second, it is very likely that religious leaders would be encouraged to develop closer and more intimate ties with their followers to maintain some degree of control and influence over them. So these religions can still be very influential, but these groups become more personalized due to the need to refer to leaders as opposed to dominant scripture and doctrine. And third, this likely means that religious hierarchies, even though they would still exist, would be less organized than it is in our world today, as religions will likely change a lot over time, and there is no governing body or structure that determines how the church should behave. Now, if you notice, these characterizations are actually not that controversial, and it provides a lot of room for both sides to argue on whether these are good or bad things. In any case, I personally think that this is a very good thing because you are able to have common terms to debate on, and it makes your job easier to specify what particular impacts are worth considering or not worth considering in the debate, as these things are contingent on how the world is portrayed. So again, the lesson here is very simple. Isolate the particular histories that are worth considering whenever possible, and then you're able to make the responses and arguments that you need to do effectively accordingly. Alright, that's it for today's video. Thank you everyone and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.